All right, we're live.
Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Fireside chat. I have a bit of an echo, Bruno.
Yeah, I think that's Dieter, not Dieter. Are you using speakers?
Yeah, I think
Let me see.
I can put my headphones.
Maybe that was somebody else as well. All right, can you guys in the chat tell us if you can see us and hear us? Good, awesome. So we're going to give it a few more minutes until other people join. They just got the email that we started going live, so we'll be live after like 2 or 3 minutes. And until then, we can test the audio, see what's happening there. Zoe, I think it's you echoing back on yourself. Can you put on some headphones if you don't have some already? Yeah, because it's recording your own sound and playing it back to you.
Okay.
All right, we're good.
Bit of an echo. Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, much better.
Much better, yeah.
Good.
Okay, I think a few more people are definitely going to show up when they see the email, but I think we're good to go.
Great. Okay, then again, welcome everyone. Hello, and yeah, welcome to today's Fireside chat on the topic Polkadot and Kusama with Web3 Foundation on Parity. My name is Zoe. I'm a Polkadot Ambassador and will moderate today's panel discussion. My personal motivation to be here today is, first of all, to bring very knowledgeable speakers together to educate and inform about the Polkadot network, but of course also to contribute and give back to the community as a Polkadot ambassador. In today's discussion, we want to cover topics such as the speaker's personal motivation via the part of the Web3 movement. Of course, also the technology differences and similarities between Polkadot and Kusama. Very important, we want to talk about the community and how to get involved. And of course, we want to hear the experts' knowledge and to see and to hear about the outlook of the ecosystem's development. Great. I wish this to be a very interactive panel discussion, of course, between the panelists, but also for the audience. So all, please feel free to ask questions in the Ask a Question box. Use the chat to interact with each other. What I see is going on here already. Because we also have some cool Polkadot and Kusama swag to give out after this event. So for today's panel discussion, we have 3 of the most knowledgeable people together from Web3 Foundation and Parity. So I'm very excited to introduce our today's panelist. We have Bruno here. He is a technical educator at Web3 Foundation. His role entails educational content to the community. He speaks at conferences and online events. but he's also the founder of the .lib newsletter. So a newsletter that covers topics such as Substrate, Kusama, and Web3. So if you have not subscribed to this newsletter yet, I highly encourage you to do so if you want to keep up to date with these topics. Welcome, Bruno. Then we have Dieter here, the head of the ecosystem development, and he leads collaborations at Web3 Foundation. He has his background in cryptography. And the last time I saw Dieter speaking was at a conference where he introduced the Substrate Builders program. So he is really focused to create a vibrant community and to encourage developers to build projects on the technology Web3 Foundation provides.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Dieter, yeah. Our third panelist today is Joe. He is a research analyst at Parity Technologies and also very active in the community in educating about projects Parity is working on. And he has a very exciting background in aerospace and cycling before joining Parity Technologies. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah, so this will be a very interactive discussion. We have some questions prepared, but again, feel free to raise some questions in the Ask a Question box for today as well. And I would say we jump into the questions directly. So I've introduced all of you a little bit, but please, could each of you could give a short introduction once again and talk what your current role entails. And maybe Dieter, you want to start.
Sounds good. Thanks, Zoe. So thanks everyone for coming. Great to always see a big crowd here. So I got, as Zoe was saying, I used to be involved in cryptography research. So that's kind of where I first learned about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies back in 2012 or 2013 when I was a researcher at the University of Waterloo. And so, I think at that time I remember like reading about things initially, and then kind of following the space for like a few years while I was working in finance, but never actually got heavily into the space until about 2016, 2017, when I started working in the space full time. Originally working for a small venture capital fund, but got kind of bored, to be honest, and wanted to contribute more meaningfully. Instead of just investing into protocols, I actually wanted to build something or actually support a team that's building something. So joined Polkadot almost exactly a year ago. So as Zoe was saying, I'm very focused on making sure that there's an ecosystem of high quality, vibrant projects building on Polkadot and Substrate. And that's how I spend most of my time.
Perfect. Bruno, you want to go next?
Sure. So like Zoe said, I'm a technical educator at the Web3 Foundation. I started in Ethereum back in 2015, and I've been at the Web3 Foundation since, I think, last year. My role there is basically to come up with proofs of concept, interesting experiments, and to teach people how to get started building on or for substrate-based chains. And we have a few projects in the pipeline that will kickstart that level development cycle so that people can focus also on some user-focused applications, not just the protocol layer stuff. And that's also something I'm most passionate about. So actual decentralized application being built on top of blockchains. Yeah, anything else you want to know about, just ask in the question box and I'll make sure I answer. I don't want to take up any more time in the intro.
Thank you, Bruno. And Joe?
Yeah, I actually have kind of like a similar trajectory as Dieter, of like the timeline of getting into the space from like late 2011 or so, and then like I'd say like late 2015, early 2016, I started to get into it more. I didn't work for a VC, but I was living in like a tiny village in Normandy and wanted something to do, so I I started like writing some trading algorithms in my spare time. And then, yeah, joined Parity like a year and a half ago to do something also more meaningful. So yeah, and then like now with Parity, kind of split between a couple of projects. So like helping a lot of our infrastructure partners get onboarded into like using Polkadot and Substrate, like interacting with the chains and some of the new primitives that we've come up with. And then also do like a lot of our documentation, like developer experience work around like our knowledge base, and a little bit of communications and writing stuff too.
Thank you, Joe. I still have a big echo here. Did everyone else see this as well, or is this?
It's a little echo.
Yeah, we are getting a little bit of an echo.
I think it's okay.
Okay, just checking, yeah. Thank you, everyone. So I think it's very exciting already to hear about your backgrounds and how you joined this space, and you're in different areas active on your current job. But what is really your personal motivation to be part of the Web 3.0 movement, and what motivates you really to do the best job on a daily basis? And we can go the same round as before.
That's you, Dieter.
Oh, right. Sorry. Apologies. Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and this is, I think, probably going to be very similar to what a lot of people say, we are seeing like a large amount of corporate takeover. We're seeing a large kind of concentration of power in central authorities, and that's just not really sustainable. I mean, you see this bubble up from time to time, and you see this hit certain inflection points in different societies, and things just crumble, and it has lasting ill effects. And so I think joining a movement who's trying to organize to prevent issues like this, I think is super important. And it actually, I think I kind of got passionate about it later, to be honest. Like, I think when I first heard about things, probably, I guess, almost 10 years ago now, I mean, I was more interested in the tech. I thought the tech was super interesting, and wanted to kind of wrap my head around that. But as I actually thought more about the social implications of what we were doing, I mean, it became much more apparent that this was something really needed to protect society.
Great,
cool.
thank you, Dieter. Bruno.
I have like a similar motivation there. I'm from Croatia, and like even one generation ago, my parents, the only source of information they had was government-sanctioned TV, government-sanctioned newspapers, government-sanctioned radio. And for me, freedom of information is a big deal. So I've always said that I want to help the world be able to send messages anywhere at any time to anybody. And I want that message to be anything. So it can be content that somebody doesn't want you to see, like the Chinese firewall or whatever. It can be a transaction so that you can send somebody money, or it can be just a hello message so that you have chat that's unbounded and unblocked and uncensorable. So I'm in this to really drive the decentralization ethos home. And my passion is getting people to run their own stuff, run their own nodes at home, run their own software and hardware, not rely on cloud providers, not put their fate in other people's hands, not keep their money on centralized platforms, stuff like that. So that's my main driver, basically information and financial freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have like a single thing. There's like a lot of kind of threads going back. I mean, like, like one of the first moments was like when I moved from England to France and like tried to close my English bank account, and it took like 4 months to have them like give me my money, and I kind of realized, oh, it's not like really my money. And then like I guess like the same time, I was reading like a lot of Cathy O'Neil, like Weapons of Math Destruction, and like had followed the Snowden stuff. So I don't think I came at it from a single angle, just kind of like a more holistic view. And then I think just working on it, like compared to other industries where you're kind of like just either doing like kind of like maintenance or production type stuff, like going like a little bit like kind of one step further. I just think it's really exciting to be building something from scratch, and it's like creating something that didn't exist before. That's it's really fun and motivating and challenging. So yeah, it's just like exciting to work on, and I think overall for good reasons. Yeah, that was all.
Yeah, just try to unmute me myself. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing these insights. It's very exciting to hear really your personal motivation. And we have, two different companies involved in this chat today. Web3 Foundation, Parity Technologies. Dieter, maybe can you give us an overview, explain a bit what's the difference exactly between Web3 Foundation, Parity Technologies? How is Polkadot involved in this ecosystem? To clarify a bit of the overall naming here.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is something that's actually super confusing, and people who, are really, really up on the space, like I feel like don't even understand this very well. So it's good to always clear this up. So the Web3 Foundation is a non-for-profit Swiss foundation, and it's really, you can think of it as the steward of both like Polkadot and Kusama. So like, similar to like things like the Ethereum Foundation, the Tezos Foundation. These are kind of the not-for-profit foundations behind the network. And I guess when you look at like, okay, like what is the foundation exactly, and like what do they do, what are they responsible for? It's really kind of primarily the coordination of the community around the protocol. So things like, like my role and people on the collaborations team, like trying to get people building on Polkadot, trying to get different tech built. We have the grants program to fund different technologies, technical education, like where Bruno is, to educate people about different technologies, and then a fairly large like marketing and communications function. On top of that, which is like actually like almost 30% of the foundation, we have a really high quality research team. And they're responsible for basically specifying Polkadot, and it's not just one protocol. When you actually think of Polkadot, it's a collection of several different protocols. So, they're responsible for making sure there's the theoretical underpinning to the protocol actually working in a safe way. And then Parity Technologies is the group that's actually implementing the protocol. So when you actually think of like, okay, like what's the relationship between Web3 and Parity? Well, Parity is basically one of the implementation teams, and actually the biggest and doing the most comprehensive work that's implementing the core Polkadot protocol. And so they're about, I think, like 120 people now, so quite massive. In Berlin, the majority of that group are developers, and the majority, like the vast majority of people there, work primarily on Polkadot and Kusama.
Thank you, Dieter. This was a great overview, and I hope it clarifies some open questions also from the audience here. So you mentioned already the size of the team, but we know that Polkadot, Kusama, they have a big community, and we have a lot of people joining here today. But for people who joined the first time to this kind of event, let's discuss a bit, how can people get involved in the community? What are best ways for developers or even non-technical people to get involved, to contribute, to maybe even do an event like we do it right currently? And on the other side, what are also some tools and contents people could read or learn about when they want to get involved in a community? And Bruno, maybe you want to start to answer this question.
Yeah, sure. Can we just test drive something? Let's everybody else mute while somebody is speaking. Maybe that'll get rid of the echo. Because Dan just gave me the heads up about that. So maybe that'll help. Okay, let's see. So yeah, how to join the community? Well, there are several ways. If you're non-technical, the Polkadot Ambassadors program is amazing. It is spearheaded by Dan and Hutch from our basically growth team, and they've been doing some incredible work. Like we've got communities all over the globe right now, and you can join any of them, and they will kind of onboard you into the ecosystem, help you start with whatever you're proficient in. So if you're not a developer, you'll be given non-technical resources. If you're a developer, you'll be pointed to technical stuff. So joining the community is really easy, streamlined, and like done really professionally. And as far as technical users, well, there's really no better resource than, like, if you want to know everything about everything, then you should probably read the wiki from top to bottom. That's wiki.polkadot.network. Not a lot of people will do that because it takes a few days to absorb all of that. The better approach is to go to substrate.io, and you should probably try to go through the first 5 tutorials there. So it's substrate.io/tutorials, and those will take you from 0 to something in a very short amount of time. In like 20 minutes, you'll have something set up on each of them. That's a great way to kickstart your substrate development kind of path, and through that, you will also learn to interact with any substrate-based chain like Kusama or Polkadot. There will also be other opportunities. We're publishing some front-end stuff soon. There will be a quick starter for Vue.js that gets combined with the Polkadot.js API so that you can connect right to it. There already is a very simple front-end interface based on React that connects to the Polkadot API. And all of them let you change which chain you're connecting to, so you can start building the front-end applications that users would want to use. The normal users, not the protocol developers. As Dan put in the chat right now, substrate recipes are also amazing. So these are being hosted by Joshi from Parity. He also has a substrate seminar every Tuesday, and I think one was just an hour and a half ago. He has this exploratory vision of substrate where he writes these recipes that dive into really specific use cases for developing on substrate, and he'll take you through the whole process of building something really specific and interesting. So there's a bunch of resources, and of course, if you want to stay on top of things when people publish new stuff, I will post all of those in .leap, shameless plug, .leapsubstack.com. Subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll tell you about any new resources that we get. But for now, just check out the ones that were posted in the chat. Especially the Polkadot light paper will give you a great intro, and then you can dive into Substrate.io or just try experimenting on your own through the tutorials. I highly recommend the tutorials.
Thank you, Bruno. This was a great overview and a lot of tools and content you have mentioned, and we have links here in the chat. Dieter, is there anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I would add one or two things. Like, I think that's an awesome breakdown of the resources available, and I think like one of the great things about Polkadot is that we do take having the right resources for many different, like, people with many different levels of background, like, very seriously, and really try to produce those. But I think like the best way to just very simply, like, the best way to get involved is to go like build for a project. And when I say build, I don't necessarily like mean like do development work. I think like builders in the space and in the Polkadot ecosystem can take many different forms. I guess like to really think about what that is, when we actually like think of what Polkadot is, like, fundamentally it's not just a piece of tech. It exists to give us the ability to solve really a coordination problem. And things like Polkadot, which have sophisticated governance and and much wider abilities, are ultimately going to give us an ability to solve like much more complex problems than we're able to do now. I think what we're going to see here, we're going to actually see like the launch of groups that wield like very large amounts of power. like, power similar to large companies or nation states, but, where the stakeholders and where the users, actually exercise like real control in what these groups are doing. And, these kind of direct democratic entities are not something, any of us are really used to dealing with. And it's something that we're only really scratching the surface of now. And so, yeah, I mean, because the technology is super underdeveloped, like right now, a great way to get involved is to like be technical and go and actually build these things. But equally, like the incentive systems and social constructs are equally underdeveloped. And so, yes, like we need the technical people to build out the tech, but we also need people to think about like how people should coordinate under these kind of entities and what are the correct incentive schemes. So I think like that's a much, that's an equally deep and challenging problem. And I think, basically, if you want to contribute to the space, you need to be thinking about like how to build these things, how we build these systems, and that's something both technical and non-technical people can do.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great motivation, really, to all kind of skills that actually everyone can be part of it and bring their special skills to the space, and especially the Polkadot network if you want to join our community. So Dieter, you talked a bit about Polkadot itself already, but Joe and Bruno, maybe you want to explain a bit more on a high level. What are really the main problems the Polkadot network is or wants to solve?
Yeah, sure. So like Dieter had like a good kind of lead into this thought. It's about a coordination problem. And like it's kind of like the top level thing that we talk about is interoperability. But like it's really important to define what that means. And so like the way we go about that is kind of through like three aspects. Like one of them is interoperability and like the idea that you can send messages between chains, which kind of automatically gets you scalability, because if you can send messages between chains, then you can just kind of like isolate applications within their own chain. And so like you can take those two together and that's pretty intuitive, but in order to make those messages meaningful, you need to have security too. So we look at like security, scalability, and interoperability as three parts of really the same thing. And so from a high level, like what Polkadot is doing is it's providing the context for those messages to have meaning. So if you think about like, if you have the same message, it can mean different things depending on how you receive it and like where you're reading it. So like if you have a message that says like, hey, you won $1,000, that has like much different meaning if it comes from like, like a random email address that you've never seen before claiming like a long lost relative versus like if you go to like your bank and they tell you that like you have an extra $1,000. So like the same message can have different meanings. And so like in the context of blockchain, you can think about that as like if you have chains that are secured by different mechanisms and they don't share some kind of like common logic for how they decide what is final, for how they execute and like act on these messages, you kind of end up back in like the same Web 2 model where you just have applications that are trusting each other. And you have to trust the message that you've received, or you have to trust the message that you sent. So in Polkadot, like what this context allows you to do is when you have a message that's sent, the receiver can trust the provenance of the message. So they know like if this says, this came from this application, they know that it actually came from that application. And likewise for the sender, they have some delivery guarantees. So they know this message is actually going to get delivered, but they also know that it's going to be acted on in the appropriate way. So if I send you a message that says like, hey, I burned 100 tokens on my chain and you can mint 100 tokens on your chain. I want to know that you're actually going to mint 100 tokens and not 200 and then come back to me later and say, oh yeah, I have, like a claim to 200 tokens of this asset. So that's what Polkadot provides, is like this common execution and security environment where if I send you a message, I actually know that you're going to act on it in the appropriate way. And we don't have to trust each other. which actually allows like for these trustless interactions where these chains can send messages that actually have meaning. So like that's from like a high level, like trying to, it's really easy to send a message between two chains. Like you can do it with an email, right? You can just send somebody an email with a message. The challenging thing is like, how do you give those messages, how do you make those messages meaningful?
Great. Thank you for giving this overview, Joe. We also know about Kusama, and the Parity team is working on it, or it's a network that's live already, which is nearly the same code base as Polkadot, but has a bit of different features, faster iteration, governance, upgrades, and lower barriers to entry. Could you explain why people would use Kusama or Polkadot? What are the differences here? And maybe Bruno, you want to take this question?
Yeah, sure. So Kusama is like experiment, not a test net. It's a main net on which we experiment with upgrades that are coming to Polkadot or are not coming to Polkadot. So this is where we are going to be trying out, not testing per se, but trying out the different palettes, the different modules that you can put into your chain first and see how they work. Of course, this is after the entire process of collaborating on them on GitHub and getting them out, and when they're developed and compiled and everything and voted into the system, because there's a process of on-chain governance which needs to happen so that people vote for that change to happen, so the chain can evolve into this new format. But in general, we'll use Kusama to Kusama is a separate network, right? It has its own tokenomics, it has its own value, it has its own user base, which has now pretty like, it has diverged quite a bit from the Polkadot holders. So we have like this unaudited version of Polkadot running in production, where we just try out the new features that we could put into Polkadot if we wanted to. And some of those interesting features are the identities palette, which will let you register an on-chain identity so that you can be found on-chain with your actual data and your contact information. This is really useful for validators because you want to know who you're representing, who you're nominating with your tokens. There are different. There's the utility palette, which will let you do some utility functions on-chain, like multi-signature wallets and so on. There are different palettes that we're testing and that we're making sure that they work properly before we even decide whether or not to bring them into Polkadot. And that's kind of Kusama's main purpose. There is to be the kind of the pioneer for the Polkadot ecosystem. It is not a temporary network. It is not going to be discarded ever, and it's going to stay alive for as long as there are validators to run it, and they're going to be validators to run it for a very long time to come, based on the interest we've seen so far. So you can think of Kusama as the cypherpunk heaven, which is very receptive to these edgy ideas. Like we have this community on Kusama, which makes you a member if you get a tattoo of the Kusama logo. Obviously, that's not going to go into Polkadot, but it's an edgy use case, a fun palette, a very interesting and unique approach to decentralized kind of communities that are self-governed that you wouldn't see elsewhere and that have real economic value attached. So you can think of Kusama like this cypherpunk heaven where you're free to explore and go wild with your ideas, basically.
Thank you, Bruno. Dieter, do you want to explain the community a bit more? What are emerging use cases for both networks we are seeing?
Sure. Yeah. I would like to just add to what Bruno said before I do that. But when you think of like fundamentally, like what is Kusama compared to Polkadot, because they do have virtually the same code base. So, the way I think about it, it's a less robust and less secure version of Polkadot. And so what does that mean? I mean, as Bruno was saying, like it's less robust because we're going to deploy new technologies to Kusama before we deploy them to Polkadot in order to, work out kind of the final set of kinks. I mean, before deploying to Kusama, we'll deploy them to West End, which is our valueless testnet. So presumably everything's working pretty okay by then, but even still, we want to make sure Polkadot is super, super stable. So we have kind of this one more, almost kind of pre-production step to that. It's less secure simply because to take over Kusama is kind of easier and cheaper than taking over Polkadot. And so, why do I want to build on a less secure and a less robust network? Well, there's kind of two reasons. I guess, like, fundamentally, like, why would I build there? Well, if it's less robust and less secure, there's probably going to be less demand to build on it. So we expect the cost of a parachain to be much, much lower on Kusama than Polkadot. And, Polkadot is always going to be 100% focused on security and robustness. And I expect applications that really, really care about that, and applications that deal with high-value transactions will always want a Polkadot deployment. So if you're this DeFi project and people are transacting kind of real value through your chain, that's Polkadot, probably 100% of the time. But equally speaking, like, I think there's going to be a market for applications that are willing to trade cheap, high throughput for lower security and robustness. These are applications that don't need bank-like security, and maybe instead of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of dots to lock up for a Polkadot parachain lease, maybe they spend less for a Kusama parachain lease and use some of that money to develop what they're building. And so, I think I think these could be in many sectors, but some rough sectors where I see this actually coming to fruition are, people building in the gaming, the content distribution, or social networking sectors. And so, kind of to get a little more concrete here, like, I see two main use cases of Kusama. And one is the one that, Bruno was talking about, basically this platform for experimentation where, particularly, and this kind of manifests in two ways. Like, one way was really the use case Bruno was getting at, where, we're going to use it, or Polkadot will use Kusama as a platform to test out new technologies before deploying it to Polkadot. Making sure that Polkadot can always have this extreme security and robustness that we're really striving for. And then equally, I expect that a lot of the higher value parachains on Polkadot will also have Kusama deployments, like almost kind of a dual deployment in Kusama to test kind of two things. Like, one, if they want to implement features that they expect to deploy to Polkadot, they can implement them on Kusama first. And two, see how their parachains react to new features deployed on Kusama before they actually hit mainnet and potentially cause some unexpected consequences to what they're building. So this is that experimentation function that Bruno explained. But then, I expect something that's even potentially bigger than that. I think Kusama could actually be used, for teams that can't afford a Polkadot parachain deployment, and that, are earlier stage startups that are really still iterating on their incentive design, building their community of users, iterating on their technology, and kind of value this faster moving network. And maybe, Kusama becomes this kind of venture network where, these teams can deploy a Kusama parachain, build up kind of their tech and their user base, and then once they really establish themselves and maybe become more successful, then maybe they eventually shift to Polkadot.
Let me just add to that real quick a comparison that maybe is kind of relatable in a way. So you can think of Kusama as your kind of garage band, an impromptu concert to which like 200 of your friends show up, and it's an unforgettable night that you'll talk about into your old age. And Polkadot is a symphony, right? Every note is in its place, every move is going to be rehearsed. It's going to be appreciated for its perfection by a large crowd of strangers, and the symphony is going to display very little variance over time, as it should. It's like a symphony that's constant over time. So in Kusama, the playlist can change while the concert is ongoing, and everybody's just going to enjoy it more. So there's going to be faster upgrades, faster changes, but everybody's in on it, and everybody's interested in that. In Polkadot, on the other hand, the symphony rarely changes, and if it does, it just requires the sign-off of a lot more people, of the venue, of the composer, of the orchestra, and ultimately the attendees who are participating and watching the symphony. So Kusama can make these upgrades really fast, and through this governance that is much faster there, and it can take risks that Polkadot will not take. It's very conservative. Polkadot is very conservative and stable, and it's going to avoid taking risks for the sake of stability and security. So upgrades will be slow and calculated.
I think we need new graphic design around like the symphony and like chaotic garage band to describe this.
I wrote the symphony in my last Polkadot article. I use that. But the thing is, like, there's no more conductor. We got rid of him.
Yeah, this was great examples and explanation. And we see that both networks are really unique themselves. So they are definitely points to look into when to decide which network is appropriate for what kind of team and use case and application. And a question that comes up often, I thought already in the question, ask the question box, when is the mainnet launching of Polkadot? I think there's not a specific date to mention. We don't want to, I think we can't say this, but Joe, maybe you can explain a